I'm standing at the site of the climax of the Chumash Revolt, where on March 16, 1824, a battle occurred right here at La Purisima Mission in Lompoc, California. The sound of musket fire, cannons, and cavalry raged for over 2 hours that morning as 500 Chumash warriors and Mexican soldiers fought for control of the mission. By the end of the day, 17 people were dead, many more were wounded, and the Mexican authorities regained control of the mission. This event was just the peak of a larger movement that lasted for months, involved 3 different missions and multiple California Indian tribes, and ended up being the largest and most successful uprising in California's mission history. Today we'll talk more about the Chumash Revolt, why it started, and hopefully bring some attention to this incredibly important moment in California history. The Chumash Revolt of 1824 began on February 21st at Mission Santa Ines in Solvang, California. There are several sources on the proximate cause for the Chumash Revolt. One is that a hot-headed Mexican soldier shot a Chumash man, another that a Chumash page was brutally tortured and murdered, but the most frequently cited cause is that a Chumash boy from La Purisima Mission came to Santa Ines to visit a family member who was being held in a jail cell. A Mexican soldier denied him entrance, and with perhaps a little bit of attitude, the boy said, "Is it perhaps that the king deprives relatives from speaking with prisoners?" And the soldier responded, "There is no longer any king except the captain," and whipped the child so publicly and brutally that it started the rebellion. On this first day, much of the mission was set on fire, and 4 Chumash men and 1 Mexican soldier were killed during the struggle. The next day, a detachment of soldiers from Santa Barbara's Presidio forced the rebels at Santa Ines to flee to La Purisima. While the events at Santa Ines were unfolding, the Chumash at La Purisima Mission rebelled here as well, and they successfully captured the entire mission grounds, including capturing the families of the soldiers themselves, and the padres, which would have happened somewhere around here in the buildings behind me. They, after a matter of days, peacefully released their prisoners, except for 1 padre who chose to stay. And they were soon joined by a large number of Chumash from Santa Ines who fled that mission to come to La Purisima, where their total number then grew to over 1,000 people who occupied this very mission. From that point to a month later, this was native land through and through. For the first time since the establishment of the mission decades earlier, indigenous people living at La Purisima had total control over their lives and their land. It was a remarkable achievement that stands out in the history of California. Behind me are the Neophyte Quarters, and Neophyte means a baptized indigenous person, and they were likely home to the several families as well as the young girls and women at the mission, and probably not too far away from here the men lived as well. So this was kind of the indigenous side of the mission, and it's quite likely that it was in this part of the mission itself that the revolt started at La Purisima, or at least the conversations before leading up to it as to what the plans were. They probably happened inside of the buildings that are now ruins right here. As you walk around the Neophyte Quarters, you can see remnants of trash left by indigenous people, and it's interesting to wonder if some of the material was deposited during the uprising itself. So literally just off the side of the trail here is a midden deposit, which is what archaeologists use to call a feature that has a bunch of trash in it. And all the little white objects, these are bits of bone and shell and things that likely are the waste of the mission Indians living here at La Purisima. As a reminder, whenever you're at an archaeological site, you should only make observations and don't disturb anything in the ground. Although they retained control of the mission, the Chumash anticipated that the Mexican authorities would come back to try to retake it. And they prepared for that by erecting a palisade wall around the mission grounds, as well as cut holes in the walls of the adobe buildings so they could shoot out of them with bows and rifles. Additionally, they had been trained in modern military tactics due to a strange case of piracy on the California coast. 6 years earlier in 1818, Argentine pirate Hippolyte Bichard occupied Monterey for 6 days and looted Mission San Juan Capistrano. With the fear of piracy on their minds, priests organized military training for Mission Indians to try to resist future attacks. This backfired during the Chumash Revolt by providing arms and training for the Chumash to use against the mission system itself. The Mexican attack finally came on the morning of March 16th. The Mexican force from San Luis Obispo was comprised of 109 infantry and cavalry, as well as a 4-pound cannon. I'm unsure of where they made their first approach, but we do know that they eventually surrounded the mission and probably would have walked right through the area that I'm standing in right now. The fight lasted for over 2 hours before the priest who remained at the mission came out to broker a truce with the Mexican soldiers. Although the mission Indians had a numerical advantage of nearly 4 times as many fighters, they were facing a professionally trained army with advanced weapons and real cavalry and artillery. When the battle was over, the troops seized 16 muskets, 150 lances, many bows and arrows, and 2 cannons from the rebels. Although the cannons sound impressive, they were small 1-pound ceremonial devices used by the missions to mark the starts of feast, and were relatively ineffective for warfare. Additionally, with only 16 muskets, the mission Indians were at a technological disadvantage. Considering these limitations, the Chumash warriors were able to fend off the Mexican army for over 2 hours using mostly bows and arrows. This came as a high price though, as 16 Chumash warriors were dead by the end of the day, compared to 1 death in the ranks of the Mexican army. Following the battle, 7 leaders of the rebellion at La Purisima were executed. The military regained control of the mission, and a blanket clemency was granted in May that brought back many mission Indians to La Purisima and Santa Ines. Things had mostly returned to the status quo antebellum, but not everybody came back to the missions. Many Chumash individuals, particularly from Mission Santa Barbara, joined Yokut groups to the east. A member of the Joseph Walker trapping party in the 1830s recorded encountering a Chumash group with mission candlesticks and other gold and silver items living in the southern Sierra Nevada mountains over 100 miles away from the nearest mission. So to some, the Chumash Revolt was a clear success. There are many ideas as to why the Chumash Revolt happened. One of them is that the decline of the mission system created conditions that were so severe that it forced mission Indians to revolt. In the late 1700s, California missions had the support of Spain, but following the beginning of the Mexican War of Independence in 1810, Spanish ships no longer brought supplies or paid the mission soldiers. The missions had to be truly self-sufficient, meaning that native labor was crucial to the mission's success. However, as time went on, many mission Indians died to disease from cramped quarters and low immunity to Old World illnesses, forcing the surviving group to work longer hours to maintain a similar level of productivity. As Father Vicente Sarría wrote in 1824, for the troops to be fed and clothed, it must be at the expense of the Indians, who in turn cannot be fed or clothed. Padres lost control over soldiers, and random theft, beatings, and rapes of native peoples became widespread. Although multiple stories on the proximate cause of the start of the rebellion exist, as we talked about before, they all involve violence against a native person from a soldier. Additionally, morale of Padres was extremely low following the Mexican War of Independence. After describing the hardships facing the California missions, Father Sarría wrote, "The result is that many of the missionaries, not wanting to be woeful spectators of the poor, unhappy neophytes' misery, anxiously request their retirement, even though efforts to find replacements have proved fruitless." After Mexican independence, only 15 out of 35 Padres at the California missions wanted to stay. Many just simply wanted to go back home to Spain. It was against this backdrop of a decaying mission system that the Chumash Revolt occurred, and it was likely in some part due to the long hours and abuses that the Chumash endured. But historian Elizabeth Haas frames the revolt in the context of the revolutionary spirit of the early 19th century. Napoleon had just brought significant upheaval to continental Europe, including Spain, and a path to Mexican independence was clear. Radical ideas moved freely between the continents. In 1821, Mexico issued its Declaration of Independence, the Plan de Iguala, which states in Article 12 that all inhabitants of New Spain, without any distinction between Europeans, Africans, or Indians, are citizens that have access to all employment according to their merits and virtues. Word traveled pretty slowly in those days, and in 1822, a Mexican politician arrived in California to proclaim the changes of independence, including the equality of Indians and the prohibition of whipping and corporal punishment. One Spanish padre wrote that the mission population had been, quote, corrupted with ideas of liberty and emancipation. Within this historic context, the Chumash Revolt makes even more sense. The Chumash had a legal justification for rising up. They were claiming what was theirs, freedom and equality as equal citizens under the Mexican flag. How could citizens be rounded up by soldiers and treated as fugitives if they left the mission property? How could citizens be forced to do arduous labor for their entire life and not ever get paid a penny? The more you look at it, it becomes really difficult to separate what the Mission Indians were going through at this time from slavery. As Father Sarría put it, these are the types of things that truly make our ministry exceedingly painful and even to a certain extent intolerable. Given this historic context, I think we can start to see the Chumash Revolt as a group of people fighting for their freedom. Despite 3 years of supposed freedom after Mexican independence, nothing had changed, so it was time to finally take that freedom for themselves. It is important to point out what do not appear to be reasons for why the Chumash Revolt happened. To me, it does not appear that this was the Mission Indians trying to just go back to the way things were before the mission system started. La Purisima Mission was founded in 1787, some 37 years before the revolt actually happened. So many of the people who participated in the revolt probably spent their whole lives within the mission system to that point. Additionally, after La Purisima was taken, many Chumash decided to stay and to make the mission their own, as opposed to fleeing into the hills to try to make a living there. It also doesn't appear to have been motivated by any sort of bloodlust or revenge, something like the French Revolution. And we know that because on multiple occasions, the Chumash peacefully allowed the European captives to leave, like what happened here at La Purisima when the soldiers' families and the soldiers themselves were just told to be on their way, but know that if they came back, there'd be a fight. Finally, while doing research for this video, I encountered a sentence by archaeologist James Dietz that stopped me in my tracks. In his description of excavations at La Purisima, he noted that the decline of the Chumash under missionization was rapid, spectacular, and complete. This amazed me because the Chumash Revolt is direct evidence against this idea, not to mention the fact that the Chumash are very much around to this day. The revolt was coordinated for several months in advance between 3 missions, likely due to the strong cultural ties between the Chumash at each mission. Historian James Sandos noted that friars expressed frustration over their difficulty in breaking the, quote, ancient beliefs of paganism and the lead-up years to the revolt, indicating that indigenous culture was still very much in existence. It's also important to wonder, why isn't the revolt more talked about? I mean, I only learned about the Chumash Revolt by doing this video. The La Purisima Interpretive Center has a brief description of the revolt, but I'm surprised it's not featured more prominently. In my opinion, it's the most exciting and significant event to have happened at the mission, perhaps in the entire mission system. If we don't know that things became so dire at missions that a revolt happened, then the trauma of that chapter of California history will remain obscured behind the sugar cube mission models we made as kids. To me, the Chumash Revolt represents the resilience of the Chumash people and their resistance to oppression by willingly taking on a much more larger and powerful force, the Mexican army, right here on this very ground. Thanks for watching, and please make sure to subscribe for more videos about the past.